What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 51, and I am the host, Kyle Ansloan. On today's show, I'm breaking down Trump's recent pardons. There's about 40 in all. And as always with Trump, it's a pretty mixed bag. There's some people that great that they're out of jail and getting the pardon, and then there's quite a few people on this list who you would rather stay in jail. So make sure you share the show. You can find it on YouTube. You get the video version there, the news tickers with the articles and everything else displayed. Or you can share the show from the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor and also write the daily news roundup. With that, let's get into the content. The first person to talk about here on the pardons is George Papadopoulos, definitely the highest profile name and the guy I'll spend the most amount of time on. Just because his story is the most interesting and certainly is being portrayed as somehow advancing the Russiagate narrative that look how corrupt Donald Trump is. He's now like undoing the evidence that he had some backroom deals with Russia. I mean, you still see people, sharing out memes that Trump is owned by Russia and that Trump was installed by Vladimir Putin as president. And so it is still important to take on these Russiagate narratives. George Papadopoulos in 2015 or 2016 meets with this guy, Joseph Massoud, who is a very shady figure who is one of the few people to not get really have their whole history spotlighted in the mainstream media and not to be really targeted by the Mueller investigation, and essentially just kind of gets to remain anonymous in all this. But he solicits a meeting with George Papadopoulos and does so with a woman that he claims to be the niece of the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Putin doesn't have a niece. This lady isn't his niece, and George Papadopoulos figures out that pretty quickly. But at that dinner, Massoud apparently tells George Papadopoulos that Russia has Hillary Clinton's emails. Now, the timing of this is important because this is prior to any public knowledge or potentially even the actual hack of the DNCCC emails that are the ones that are released by WikiLeaks. I got my WikiLeaks shirt on today. So, those emails show that the corruption from Hillary Clinton and everything like that. But this is actually referring to the emails that Hillary Clinton had on her private email server. So talking about caches of emails here from Hillary Clinton, there's I think three maybe big bunches. There's the private server emails, there's the DNC emails, and then there's the Podesta emails. Podesta was her campaign advisor. These emails were the ones that did have some legitimate information in there about the Citigroup and stuff, recommending who was going to be in Obama's cabinet, and then Obama going through and picking that exact cabinet. But these are also emails that had things like about spirit cooking, that lady, and some of the Pizzagate conspiracies originate from the number of hot dogs they were ordering or something, or whatever kind of code that we're talking in those emails. Then there's the DNC emails. These show the DNC rigging the election against Bernie Sanders, Donna Brazile, feeding Hillary Clinton. The email, the questions. There's also, I believe, Sidney Blumenthal email to Hillary Clinton, worrying about potential genocide in Libya and stuff like that. Those emails are in there, but of course Hillary Clinton goes along with the war anyway. That's why those emails that are important. And then there's the private server emails where Hillary Clinton, rather than using the State Department server as she was legally obliged to, set up her own private server and use that email account while she was running the State Department. The problem that created is there's supposed to be oversight of the State Department. People have access to the emails to make sure there's not corruption going on. For example, the Gulf Arab monarchies like the Qataris, the Emiratis, and the Saudis donated multi-million-dollar sums to the Clinton Foundation, and then Hillary Clinton pushed through multi-million and billion-dollar weapon sales to those countries. Is there a potential conflict of interest there? That's the reason why these emails are important. So anyways, once that private email server is discovered, there's some legal issues here. Also, people want to FOIA those emails because they're government business. People should be able to, see what's in those emails. Of course, the government will go through and they will pick out the ones that are classified information and stuff like that. But the rest of it is not classified, should be brought to light. Now, what the FBI allows Hillary Clinton to do, because she says, oh, here's the problem. I did use this for the State Department work, but I also used it for my private, planning Chelsea's wedding and stuff like that. And I can't let all those emails go public. And so then the FBI allows Hillary Clinton and her legal team to go through, determine which emails are personal and which ones are professional, and only give over the professional ones, and then destroy the rest of the emails. They scrub the servers, everything else. They don't even keep these emails like somewhere and say, like, we promise not to look at them, just in case it turns out that maybe the Hillary Clinton legal team like had some bias, and maybe there might be one or two emails that were like, mischievous, that they try to hide or something like that. Nope. All that, gets destroyed. And so these are the emails that are being talked about in this conversation. It's important because these emails have never come to light, while the DNC emails and the Podesta emails were ultimately put out and published by WikiLeaks. They're shown to be true. The source of these emails is still unknown. I guess the Podesta emails are known to have been hacked or retrieved through what they call a spear phishing attack. Basically, they got Podesta to give up his password, and then they were able to go in and get these emails. On the DNC emails, I think they're still not sure exactly. The group that investigated this wasn't actually the FBI. It was this company, CrowdStrike. And the president of that company says that they could not show the emails being exfiltrated. So whatever kind of surveillance they had going on, and I guess they felt like they had traps set up to where if people were stealing these emails, that they would, be able to figure out who. But in sworn congressional testimony, the head of CrowdStrike said that no, they couldn't prove that. And there's at least some counter evidence that it's potential that these emails were downloaded off of the server and weren't obtained through a hack at all. So back to Papadopoulos. These, he finds this out, and then he gets drunk in a bar with a Australian diplomat named Alexander Downer, and he tells Alexander Downer what he describes as gossip. Not too Downer, but he was saying that he was gossiping, saying that Russia had those emails. And so that's kind of how Papadopoulos gets drug into all of this, is that he heard a rumor from Joseph Massoud about emails, and referring to different emails than the ones that ultimately get investigated by Mueller and are within the Russiagate narrative, not the DNC emails. But he gets tied up and wrapped into all of that, and of course, eventually either misremembers or tells a lie to the FBI on the timeline. Wasn't committing a crime anyways, and they force him to plead guilty to lying to the FBI, and he serves 30 days in jail. He didn't do anything wrong. He was just dragged through the mud, targeted in an investigation because the intelligence community was really trying to rein in Donald Trump, specifically over his desire to form stronger ties with Russia. And look, this wasn't a policy that means that the U.S. is going to be subservient to Russia, or that Donald Trump wanted this because he was owned by Russia, but rather the U.S. and Russia were near coming to direct blows in Syria. The alternative to Donald Trump was Hillary Clinton, who was recommending installing a no-fly zone in Syria, which meant the U.S. was at least threatening to shoot down Russian planes, if not committing to. So that was a major problem. Hillary Clinton wanted to confront Russia over the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. And, Donald Trump said that, hey, it seems like Russia is working really hard to bomb Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. And so it seems like maybe we could work together on this. And, while somebody like Hillary Clinton think that you're somehow connected to Russia or you're subservient to Russia because you realize that people who run around and chop people's heads off and will blow themselves up in the middle of cities are real problems, that should, the US and Russia could work together to get rid of. This was also something that John Kerry tried to install while he was Barack Obama's Secretary of State. And it would have been US policy potentially as Donald Trump takes office had a US Air Force bomb not hit a Syrian position outside of the Syrian city Deir ez-Zor, and allowing ISIS to take that position, and the airstrike itself killed scores, I believe up to 80 Syrian soldiers. And so, this policy that Trump wanted and that George Papadopoulos and Michael Flynn also were advocates for in Syria was something that was supported by John Kerry. Of course, this errant airstrike from the Air Force just happens to hit the Syrian position and ruin that agreement. It seems like there's some forces at work here, trying to make sure that the U.S. and Russia didn't coordinate together to work against ISIS in Syria. So I think that's most of the Papadopoulos story. And as I said, all these other names I'm going to get through a little bit quicker. But I did want to take just a second to thank the sponsor of the show, and that is Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde sells great CBD products. Carlos and his wife, Vanessa Ablar, do a great job with their business. They've overcome quite a bit of adversity in 2020. They had just gotten their physical location up and running, and then the lockdowns killed the business. But they just adapted, and they brought it to an online, and they're distributing it. They do great products. Whenever I ask for their products, they get there really quick. They're lab tested, so you're getting quality stuff. I definitely recommend checking out their website, palomaverdestore.com. Use the promo code PEACE for a discount and to let them know you came from the show. All right. Next up, we have Alexander van der Zwaan. And this guy, like George Papadopoulos, it's interesting that, they get so heavily targeted by the FBI because, they do have names that are obviously not, Anglo. Papadopoulos and Alex, I believe, are both white, but Papadopoulos and van der Zwaan makes you sound non-American, definitely. And so this is another guy that gets targeted by the FBI, tells a lie to the FBI and gets thrown in jail for it. No collusion, anything like that between Trump and Russia. So the whole investigation itself is bogus, and yet during the bogus investigation, some people tell some pretty vague and short lies, like Michael Flynn, like George Papadopoulos, and end up doing a little bit of time in jail. And of course, I guess I wouldn't care so much, especially about a character like Michael Flynn, who has some really obvious flaws dating back to the time that he was overseeing and participating in the night raids in Afghanistan. But his conviction is used to push this fake narrative of Russiagate, and so that's why I think these pardons are kind of important. Next up is getting into definitely less high profile names. Alford Lee Crum is now an 89-year-old man, but at 19 he was convicted of operating a distillery and did 3 years in jail. Making moonshine isn't a crime if you make your own liquor and somebody else wants to buy it. Good for you, good for them. Glad this guy got pardoned. The only bad thing is, of course, he's been out of jail forever. And I'll bring this up now, but it's definitely a trend throughout these pardons that the people who, it's not that he was wrongfully imprisoned. It's just that, his crime wasn't violent. Nobody got hurt in committing it. And he's been a good boy the rest of his life. And so now he deserves to have this scrubbed as, he's an old man, when really it should be that he didn't commit an actual crime. Nobody got hurt. He was making a product that other people wanted to buy. Just like you wouldn't throw somebody in jail for making a pencil, you shouldn't throw somebody in jail for making moonshine. And so for that reason, he's pardoned. The next person didn't actually get a pardon. They had their sentence commuted. And this is Crystal Manuz, and she was sentenced to 20 years for drawing a map that helped transport weed across the border. It should have been a full pardon since, again, this wasn't a crime at all. And of course, 20 years is an absurd sentence. In some of her commentary after she was commuted, she said that she wasn't adequately defended by her court-appointed public defender, I guess, and felt like that's the reason she got such a large sentence. The next woman also had her sentence commuted, and that is Denise Hill, or Hall, excuse me, and she got 18 years for non-violent drug crimes. So again, didn't commit a crime, should be out of jail. Good for Donald Trump. There's another guy, Weldon Angelos, and I believe he did get a pardon. He got 55 years for selling weed to an undercover agent. This one is just, crazy, since it's a drug transaction, and just happened to be one of these people that got unfortunate enough to sell weed to some undercover agent, right? How many people, I guess I knew, especially when I was in college, that like sold weed, or even like if somebody asked them for weed, would sell them a little bit of their weed. That wasn't that uncommon for a thing to see. And so knowing that like all those people were risking like these massive jail sentences is absurd, and again, definitely deserved a pardon. Otis Gordon served several years for non-violent drug charges and received a pardon. I believe he was already out of jail when he received the pardon. Caesar Lawanza served 14 months for non-violent drug offenses. He was already out of jail. For these, people who are younger, Crum's an 89-year-old man, so it may not have much of an impact on his life, but for these younger people, getting these felonies off of their records could be huge. If you're applying for a job, applying for housing, or just about anything else, you have to put down that you're a felon. A lot of people don't take the time to go, oh, is it for a nonviolent drug crime? Because if that's the case, that's a different situation than if this guy murdered 3 people and I really don't care about the drug crime, but just see the felon and throw out their application. And so that could be very helpful if you no longer had to put that down. Also, restoration of like gun rights, voting rights, all these other things that shouldn't be stripped away, specifically from nonviolent drug offenders, is very important. The next name here is Joseph Martin Stevens, and he did 18 months for a gun law violation. Again, violating gun laws aren't violent acts. You're allowed to own what you want to own, and even if you're a felon or something like that. Now, you may say, like in an ideal society or something like that, people who have murdered people, maybe they you wouldn't allow them to like own a gun in your community or something like that. But as far as the US government just arbitrarily saying anybody who violates or who acquires what we say is a felony, whether that's tax fraud, bank fraud, wire fraud, selling too much pot, heroin, whatever, and then you lose your gun rights the same as somebody who murdered a couple of people, that really doesn't make sense. So yeah, gun laws, non-violent crimes, again, should be let out of jail, should have this removed from the record. Topeka Sam, in 2012, he was sentenced to 130 months for non-violent drug crimes. He does 3 years and now receives a full pardon. James Batsman, he didn't pay the IRS on $250,000 in payroll taxes. He at least says and makes, I think, a pretty decent argument here that he didn't realize that he needed to pay payroll taxes on this particular money that he was paying out in overtime, and he had since repaid all the money to the IRS that he needed to, all the fines. And so I have no idea why that guy should have a criminal record, and good for Trump for giving him a pardon. And then the next the last person I have on, and these are my list of I think the best pardons that Trump gave out, is Russell Pelosi, and he is now deceased, but he was only guilty of nonviolent drug crimes. And so those are the absolute best pardons. There's a couple here that I thought maybe were less important. This guy in Utah, Representative Phil Lyman, led a protest against BLM restrictions. However, it seems like his protest trampled a little bit on some Native American lands, and so he only does 10 days and receives a fine. Seems like he's a pretty well-off guy, so he didn't seem like the most important pardon, but in the sense he was pardoning or protesting against the very long overreach of the BLM in around 2014. So that was important. This guy, Christopher Touetz, he's apparently a reformed addict and now community leader. Rand Paul pushed for his pardon. He is somebody that I guess committed crimes that weren't just nonviolent, but again reformed and now is an advocate, and so no reason to keep him stuck with that criminal record forever. Andrew Barlow Warden was convicted of wire fraud and apparently stopped committing crimes and repaid the money that he stole prior to even being aware that he had charges against him. So pardon seems appropriate there. Rebecca Charleston, apparently guilty of tax evasion in 2006, and she is a sex trafficking victim. So good for Trump for pardoning her. Mark Salanger, I believe is how you say his name, actually apparently did a year in jail for violating the FARA Act, which isn't something people usually go to jail for. That's the act that says if you receive money from a foreign government, you have to report it to a registry. So many different elected leaders get away with violating this all the time, especially once they leave office and become lobbyists, and then they don't register on FARA and stuff like that. And then Roger Stone also received a pardon, and he seemed like one of these guys that was also generally entrapped in the whole Russiagate situation. I took him down a little bit from like the Papadopoulos standard just because Stone I guess it did seem like he called Randy Credico and threatened his dog when he was a witness. So that was somewhat disturbing. But yeah, again, doesn't need to go through jail, and was far too prosecuted for the lies he told, just trying to up his own publicity and the whole Russiagate thing. People who I don't know, maybe should be in jail, maybe not, but probably weren't guilty or were accused of doing things of that probably aren't crimes really, like Duncan Hunter, who's a former Republican congressman. In 2011 he was sentenced to one count of misusing campaign funds. This guy was good on some things, he was horrible on other things, and so there's certainly things he did in Congress that you could jail him for, but not nothing with the misusing campaign funds. If anything, that should just be, don't donate to this guy because he's not going to actually use the money you give him on what he says, kind of like a charity that pays out too much money to a certain cause or something like that. That doesn't seem like a particularly serious crime. Paul Manafort was convicted of tax and bank fraud for the shenanigans that he was playing in Ukraine. Tax fraud, I don't think that's particularly a crime. Bank fraud, it depends on who you're stealing money from. Of the figures in Russiagate that seem like kind of dirty swamp creatures, who I wouldn't mind seeing in jail, Paul Manafort is on that list. This Dr. Judith Neargon committed Medicare fraud, and and with like the Medicare fraud, there's some people who steal like tens of millions of dollars, and that's disturbing. But a lot of people don't get away with all that much, and I'm not sure how big of a deal that is. I do know that some of it's problematic because some old people really do feel bad that they're sucking up so much resources and stuff like that, and so if you're overbilling, you make people like less likely to like want to engage in treatments or something like that. But not the worst crime. Jave Kassoff did 4 months for home confinement and $100,000 fine for a false tat statement. I just put him on the like kind of med list because he apparently only got the pardon because he hosted a Trump event, and so it's not exactly the best way to give away pardons is who kind of deserves one, but who could get the attention of the president by like holding events for him and stuff like that. Here's a list of more people who really didn't seem to commit violent crimes necessarily and who made restitution. Afonso Costa is a dentist who overbilled the government medical system. He paid fines. He only got the pardon because he's a friend of Ben Carson. Steve Stockman, he did 2 years in jail for misusing charity funds and received the pardon apparently because of a COVID health risk. Ricky Cantor, he made shoe inserts for people with diabetes. His story I wasn't really sure on. He kind of claims that he was making the products he was making and didn't realize they weren't up to Medicare standards. But maybe he was just making a cheap product and knew it. William Lemos Jr. Committed financial crimes in the 1990s. He's served 27 months and paid out $400,000. So he probably did the time for the crime he committed. Daniela Gonez Wagner was sentenced to 240 months in May of 2019. So she's done about a year and a half. Paid $15 million in restitution and committed about $50 million in fraud. That's a lot of money to be stealing. John Tate and Jency Benton are names familiar to libertarians. They were working on the Ron Paul campaign in 2012 and are accused of paying $76,000 to an Iowa rep to endorse Ron Paul. Benton, I think, has since gone on to work on both the Rand and McConnell campaigns. He's not one of my favorite figures. And then Margaret Hunter for misuse of TATS funds. And she was an elected official. This is now moving on to some of the people that I think probably shouldn't have been pardoned at all. Chris Collis is a former New York congressman who sentenced to 26 months for security fraud, in part taking advantage of his position. Ignacio Ramos and Jose Compson are border patrol agents, and they shot a fleeing drug smuggler and then tampered with the scene. Philip Estaformes, $1.3 billion in fraud fraud claims to Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, 1.3 billion is a crazy number. Mary McCarthy used her position as Palm Beach City Commissioner to steer bond underwriting business to her husband's company. So, public official taking advantage of her position, keep her in jail. Christopher Wade pardoned for he was pardoned for some kind of cyber crimes, but this is the guy who's indictment and sentence are still under sealing in New York, and so it's not exactly clear of what he is guilty of, or exactly what his crimes were. Like, did he steal something? Was he hacking something? Anyways, he's now getting a pardon. Robert Cullingen was convicted of conflicts of interest because he did favors for a lobbyist in exchange for tickets and meals. So, stealing money from the taxpayers. John Bullaby and Peter Atkinson were the owners of Hollinger Holdings, which is a major media group, and it was a public company, and they paid themselves extra and secret bonuses, so essentially stealing from the other shareholders. Joseph Osafint, he illegally searched businesses as an ICE prosecutor. Charles Kushner, the father of Jared Kushner, who is Trump's son-in-law, the guy who's run Trump's terrible Israel policy and all that. He was sentenced to 2 years for tax law violations. I think he served a pretty light sentence and now gets a pardon. Then Mark Shapiro and Irving, I think Stipley, did 7.5 years for a real estate scheme where they stole a lot of money from people. So they don't need a pardon. And then here is the worst of the worst, the absolute most disgusting 6 pardons that Trump handed out. There are the 4 men who were convicted and sentenced to life in prison for massacring 17 civilians in Nisour Square, Baghdad. This was, I believe, 2004, 2005. This included killing 2 boys ages 8 and 11. So these are child murderers that Trump is just letting back out onto our streets. We're all, hold your children because, these guys might come around and kill them if, probably only the, browner children. Be honest, they're probably not very interested in killing white children, but these are dangerous people. Again, Nicholas Satin, Paul Slow, Evan Liberty, and Dustin Hurd are these 4 men who should spend the rest of their lives in jail. They worked for Blackwater. If you want any more details, you look up the Nisour Square massacre. And then Elijah Manier has a pretty good piece out this week in Responsible Statecraft as he witnessed the slaughter. Stephanie Moore is a police woman who had a canine unit, and after a homeless man had surrendered to her, she let the dog maul him anyways. It caused him to have 10 stitches. But anytime you would train a dog to the point it would attack a surrendering man, so whatever you have to do to a very loving animal to get it to act so ruthlessly is disturbing to me. And then that you would sick it on a man who had surrendered to you means that you might just go around attacking any random person in town. So Stephanie Moore is somebody you want to avoid. And then Gary Bergman, who is a Border Patrol agent who beat innocent people who he had already handcuffed. Again, innocent, essentially people, maybe they crossed the border. I guess, you could say that, well, that's technically a crime, but at the same time, it's not like a crime. You're just walking across the border. There's absolutely no reason to beat someone for that. And Gary Bergman's a dangerous man who's now back on the streets. All right, I'm going to get into just a few more stories, non-pardon stories, before I wrap up today. This is kind of a cool one here. This is half of 2-time Pro Bowler Russell Okung. He's a lineman with the Carolina Panthers, is going to be paid in Bitcoin. He's got like a $13 million contract, and I guess about, what does that mean? 6.5 of that will be paid out in Bitcoin. So, I mean, the Bitcoin is booming right now. I like over 25K or something insane like that. I'm going to set up a little Bitcoin donation thing I gotta figure out like kind of where I want to land that at and everything, but I would like to have it set up that people would like to donate to the show in Bitcoin. You can, so yeah, Russell Acuna is definitely a good Twitter follow too. He tweets a lot about the lockdowns and other stuff. It seems like a pretty principled libertarian kind of guy, and I like to see people looking at alternatives for the U.S. dollar. The next one I have is from Thoughts 40, and that's in Stockton, California. And that is there was just a salon operating, right? And everybody was taking precautions. They had everything spaced out enough. But even though they really don't have evidence or any exact proof that, getting haircuts is something that spreads COVID, the board of barbering and cosmetology said that you have to follow the lockdown orders and that you can't operate your business. It doesn't mean that if you have no other way to provide for your family or anything like that, no other considerations. If they say you have to close, you have to close. And if you close or if they say you have to close and you open, they're going to send police dressed up like they're going to raid a drug cartel. You know what I mean? You would expect that they're going after El Chapo or something like that again. With they're coming into these places in body armor. It's absolutely absurd that the police are acting like this just for, again, at most violating the lockdown order that shouldn't even exist. But that you have them coming in with the heavy weapons is very disturbing. Eventually, this is going to end up with somebody getting killed, and that's kind of what you have to realize you're pushing for if you're pushing lockdowns. Event and of course the police enforcement of lockdowns is kind of like if you're advocating for enforcing the drug laws. Eventually, a police is going to kill somebody that shouldn't be killed over pot. The House votes to override President Trump's NDAA veto. The Senate is expected to do that, I believe, today. That's Wednesday, December 30th. The House vote wasn't close, 322 to 87. I think there's about 20 Democrats who voted not to override the veto, and from them, I think that was a pretty solid vote. Just because Donald Trump's veto wasn't over what it should have been over. And a lot of times it's very easy for politicians to just kind of react to the politics rather than the actual policy and the bill. And the bill here is a 400 or $740 billion spending in all kinds of hawkish policies. Can't bring troops home from Afghanistan, can't bring troops home from Germany. That's all in this bill. So good votes against it. Ro Khanna, the Squad, and a few others were on top of that. And of course, they're joined by a significant number of Republicans, 60 or so. Tom Massey and the Freedom Caucus guys, and probably the lone libertarian there, Justin Amash. The next story I have is from antiwar.com by Dave DeCam. Joe Biden calls for modernizing U.S. defenses to face Russia and China. Pretty much all there in the headline, and for people who listen to the show, they know modernizing really just means hundreds of billions of dollars in spending to face non-existent threats from Russia and China. To the extent that we have issues and tensions with these countries, the solution isn't to spend more on defense, but rather to look for areas of negotiations on both arms control, but also to ramp down tensions and the trade wars and stuff like that. Trade is far better than war. I found this interesting article by Brett Wilkins at Common Dreams titled Digital Watchdog Says Facebook Behind Intentional Decrease in Traffic to Pro-Palestinian Pages. What pro-Palestinian pages are finding is that there's at least a 50% drop, if not more than an 80% drop in traffic on their pages, and they're facing these increasing warnings. I've even gotten a couple when I've posted some things about Israel that says that posts similar to yours have been flagged and taken down in the past, and so you probably shouldn't post this. And it's pretty effective in making you not want to post things. So definitely disturbing that this is going on, but when people talk about censorship or wanting to censor things on social media, often they think they're like targeting somebody like Donald Trump, when really this is a case where they're essentially going with the Gestapo, and the oppressed people are having their words and their pleas and their cries throttled and censored, so less people see them. More people see the suffering of the Palestinians, then maybe they will be more likely, at least to oppose the $3.3 billion that the U.S. gives Israel every year to help with that occupation, and of course all the diplomatic cover and everything that happens at the UN. All right, I think that is the last story that I have for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Be sure to check out the sponsor, Paloma Verde, palomaverdestore.com. Use the promo code PEACE. YouTube, Conflicts of Interest. Check out the Libertarian Institute, and the news roundup and the show are published there. And I'll be back with another show on Friday.